As an emerging creative genius, you've probably realized that in the long run, the only way to achieve results is through working with other people. Creative geniuses, from Plato right up through F.M. Alexander, are all great teachers. They form schools and academies to pass on their knowledge to others. My favorite expression of genius is helping others discover and express their own genius. In this session, we'll explore the keys to bringing out the creative genius of others, how to become a creative coach, teacher, manager, or parent. I worked my way through graduate school by working as a professional juggler. But as I mentioned earlier, learning how to juggle wasn't so easy. Remember the instructions given to me by my first coach? He's the one who said, "Take these 3 balls, throw them up, and don't let any of them drop." Like my first juggling coach, many experts aren't very good teachers. Yet somehow the belief persists that expertise in a given area automatically qualifies the expert to be a coach or teacher. Someone may be a brilliant engineer or accountant, or maybe a brilliant salesman, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that person will be effective as chief engineer, head accountant, or vice president of sales. Technical accomplishment is not the same as understanding the process of bringing out the best in others. There's no intrinsic correlation between technical competence and coaching, teaching, or management skill. As a matter of fact, experts are often poor teachers and coaches because they've forgotten how to put themselves into the mind of a beginner. Frank Lloyd Wright once suggested that an expert is someone who's stopped thinking. Of course, the ideal coach is one who combines expertise in a discipline with a practical understanding of the learning process. Even so, if you apply the principles in this part of the program, you may be surprised to discover that you can become an effective coach for anyone in just about anything. Ultimately, you are your own best coach. And the more you learn about coaching others to bring out their creative genius, the better you'll be at bringing it out in yourself and vice versa. You earn the right to guide others by experiencing the process of growth and change for yourself. As your understanding of the creative spiral deepens, it forms the spiritual sustenance with which you can begin nurturing others. It's essential to walk your talk when teaching, coaching, or leading others. The word education comes from the root educere, which means to draw out or to lead forth. Unfortunately, many of us grew up as though educere meant to stuff in. If we're not careful, we can find ourselves applying this old model when guiding or coaching others. But the best coaches and teachers create a context which brings out the best in their students. They make a point of nurturing cooperation, teamwork, and creative competition. Over the years, I've worked in many organizations filled with well-educated, intelligent people. Although pressures abound, most of these organizations are, by any objective measurement, remarkably affluent. Yet some are miserable rat holes, pervaded by fear, and others are fun, inspiring places to be. What's the difference? It's best summed up in the parable of the banquet table. Heaven and hell are the same. In each place, people sit at large rectangular banquet tables. The tables are set beautifully and replete with every imaginable delicacy. All the diners in both settings have large wooden paddles strapped to their hands, and the paddles can't be removed. In hell, everyone tries to feed themselves. Food flies in all directions, and fights break out constantly. In heaven, everyone feeds the person across from them at the table. In the movie Glengarry Glen Ross, Alec Baldwin plays the role of head of sales for a cheesy real estate company. His motivational strategy is straight from hell. Aiming to spur his team, he announces a sales competition. First prize is a new Cadillac. Second prize is a set of steak knives. Third prize is you're fired. The best coaches, motivators, and leaders take a different approach. They view competition in accordance with the original Olympic ideal. In the original Olympic ideal, a javelin thrower throws his best to honor the gods, expressing the glory of humanity and inspiring his opponent to greater achievement. The opponent responds by mustering his best, aiming to spur his competitor to further glory. Competition becomes a creative process, energizing the never-ending quest for excellence. Leaders know that the calm in communicate means together. They nurture teamwork, cooperation, and creative competition by identifying and then reminding people of their common interests and ideals. They seek to bring out the best in others by seeing them accurately, appealing to their strengths, and supporting their areas of growth. They leverage diversity by orchestrating teams based on complementary tendencies and styles, and they consistently recognize and reward teamwork. Like Coach John Wooden once said, "It's amazing how much can be accomplished when no one cares who gets the credit." The best coaches also get their teams, their students, to write down and then be able to articulate their goals. So encourage your students to write out and articulate their goals and review them regularly. If you're coaching a team, get your players to put together a mission statement for every season. The next point is to feed your students' success mechanism. Help your students discover the difference between current reality and the goal, creatively bridging the gap between them. For your students or players' success mechanism to function properly, they need to compare the reality of current performance with the desired goal. Discover the right amount of creative tension for each student or player. Next, be sure to create a fear-free environment. Avoid using judgment or fear to manipulate. Rather, create conditions where fears are recognized, accepted, and transformed. Although fear and intimidation can be used to get short-term results, in the long run, it creates compensatory maladjustments. Now, a very important point. Never use humor. Of course, I'm only kidding. You want to use humor to reduce stress and fear. Transform anxiety with laughter. Nietzsche once said that humor is humankind's most divine quality. Keep a light perspective even in the midst of serious things. Another key is to actually expect success. Maintain confidence in your students based on your deep understanding of the innate capacities and design of the human brain. A growing body of research suggests that student performance is dramatically affected by teacher expectation. In a study published in the Journal of Applied Psychology entitled Pygmalion Goes to Boot Camp, Expectancy, Leadership, and Trainee Performance, Army drill instructors were told that one platoon of new students were gifted with exceptional leadership ability. Of course, they were just average recruits, but the boot camp leaders didn't know that. Now, at the end of a 15-week boot camp, these recruits were tested and their scores on every objective test were significantly higher than an average platoon. The same experiment was done, this time also with an average group, but the drill instructors were told that the students were below average. And sure enough, at the end of the 15 weeks, they performed at below average levels. The great thing about this is when the researchers came to the drill sergeants and said, Look, these were all normal recruits, the ones who you thought were really good and the ones who you thought were really bad. The drill sergeants refused to believe the researchers. Students sense your expectations for them not only through what you say, but more powerfully by the way you look at them, your facial expressions, and the quality of your voice tone. After every Olympics, gold medal winners are interviewed by the press. A reporter almost always asks something like, "What's the secret of your success?" And champion after champion replies, "I couldn't have done it without my coach, mom, dad, uncle, husband, wife, friend, who always believed in me." So be the person whose belief in others changes their lives. Now, here's something a little tricky, because although you've got to be fully committed to helping your students achieve their goals, you've got to avoid linking your own measurement of self-esteem to their performance. This balancing act tends to be particularly challenging and, most important, when you're coaching your own kids. Letting go of your ego is also a key to becoming an effective, empathic listener. And the most skilled coaches and leaders train themselves to get better and better at the skill of empathic listening. The word empathy means to enter into the feeling of another's experience. It comes from the Greek root empathia, meaning affection or passion. All the great religions preach love. And this may sound like too grand an idea to actually translate into everyday life. But the art of listening is a simple, everyday way to integrate this most noble of sentiments into actual practice. Listening is not just a function of hearing, it's also a function of observation. Learn to listen with your eyes. Open yourself to the messages communicated through people's body language. Bring your attention to the subtleties of facial expression. Look at their eyes and ask, what's the real message? The eyes are a direct extension of the brain, the windows of the soul. They tell you what someone's really trying to communicate. Listen carefully to the quality of voice tone. It's rich with meaning. Consider how much you can determine about a friend's mood by the way they say their first word on the telephone. Of course, you also want to listen to the words. Listen so that you can repeat in your own words the content of a person's message. Most folks are pretty good at repeating back the content of a conversation, but it's harder to reflect the essence. Be prepared to repeat the words and reflect the feeling and spirit of the person to whom you're listening. Listening is one of the most powerful forms of communicating. By listening, you communicate to others the depth of your concern and care. Listening is an act of leadership. It takes coraggio. As Stephen Covey emphasizes, it takes a great deal of security to go deep into a listening experience because you open yourself up to be influenced. It's a paradox because in order to have influence, you have to be influenced. The more you allow yourself to open to others, the greater you'll find your ability to influence and lead them. Listening would be a lot easier if everyone was in touch with their own feelings and able to articulate them freely. Frequently, people don't seem to know what they mean, and they have a difficult time expressing themselves. Nevertheless, the rapport you create by listening in an empathic way serves as a framework to help people discover what they really meant to say. As Viktor Frankl once wrote, "Love is the only way to grasp another human being, to see the essential traits and features, the potential in him which is not yet actualized but ought to be actualized. By his love, the loving person enables the beloved person to actualize these potentialities." True empathic listening is a really rare experience. In a study of different systems of psychotherapy, Researchers found that whatever the psychotherapeutic style, 1/3 of the patients seemed to improve, 1/3 stayed the same, and 1/3 got worse. Of those who improved, the patients experienced one key ingredient in common: accurate empathy. Sadly, the only time many of us have the experience of accurate empathy is when we pay for it in therapy. Even then, we have only a 1 in 3 chance of finding it. Most people experience only very rare moments of being understood by another. Frequently, this fleeting experience becomes the basis for falling in love. In a world where people see stereotypes and can't slow down to recognize the soul of another being, the simple act of empathic listening can have a profoundly positive effect. The art of listening is a sin-virgin activity requiring understanding of the paradox of influence and the use of both sides of your brain. We listen for content and facts with our left brain, and we listen for feeling, body language, voice tonality, and gestalt with our right. Creative coaches know that they get results with people one at a time. As you use your whole brain and your whole heart to reach out and empathically open yourself to others, you'll realize that each of us is an irreplaceable, precious jewel unlike any other, and that we are, at the same time, fundamentally the same. Everyone longs to be seen, respected, and appreciated in their uniqueness. As you hold these truths in mind and heart, you'll be better able to listen, build trust, and get results. Empathic listening sets the stage for giving effective, constructive feedback. The best coaches and leaders master the art of giving great feedback. Great feedback is offered in a context of support. For your feedback to be taken to heart, you must create and sustain an atmosphere of rapport, trust, and respect. Effective feedback is offered in the context of support and with the spirit of continuous improvement. It's most effective when solicited rather than imposed. But if your feedback springs from empathic observation, sensitivity, respect, and a sincere concern to guide others to fulfill their highest potential, then people will increasingly seek you out to ask for feedback. Feedback is best when it's timely and well-timed. It's got to be given promptly. If you want to give someone feedback on his performance at a meeting, for example, give it as soon as possible after the meeting rather than waiting till a few weeks later. In addition to being timely, you want to make sure that the feedback is well-timed. Sensitivity to receptiveness and emotional state is key. Ask, is this a good time for me to give you some feedback on your performance? Or, when can we get together for a feedback session? The best feedback is useless if the time or place prevents it from being digested. For example, even the most brilliant critical feedback will almost always do more harm than good if offered in public. Feedback must also be specific and descriptive. Specifics are more constructive than broad generalities, and descriptions of behavior are more useful than summary judgments. To tell somebody, "You're insensitive to clients," or "You're a slob," is never going to be as constructive as saying, "Look, you interrupted the client twice and you failed to make eye contact," or "Your shirt tail was hanging out and your shoes were unshined." Similarly, feedback has got to be actionable. In other words, it must refer to a behavior that a person can change. To remind someone of something that he's powerless to change is only to increase his frustration and sabotage trust. For example, "John, I'm afraid that you just aren't tall enough to cut the right figure in sales meetings." Well, there's nothing John can do about how tall he is. And it's probably not the real issue anyway. The real issue is probably something to do with John's presence in the sales meeting. So more appropriate feedback might be, "John, we've got to find a way to strengthen your presence in sales meetings. Let's work together to figure it out." Now, before you even begin giving anybody feedback that's specific, descriptive, and actionable, it's a good idea to preface the feedback with a question. Ask him or her to evaluate their strengths and weaknesses first. People are usually much more receptive to your observations when you demonstrate respect by asking for theirs. Not only that, by asking first and listening carefully, you'll usually learn something valuable that you wouldn't have known otherwise. Now, let me give you some advice on offering advice. Generally, it's a better idea to avoid giving advice. Instead, you want to share relevant information and allow people to draw their own conclusions. When you tell someone what to do, you compromise their freedom to decide for themselves. Advice is appropriate when someone is really stuck, when the situation is a pressing priority, or when it's specifically requested. I also recommend giving advice only when you know that the advice is really accurate. Another key is to focus on what is said and done, not why it was said and done when you're giving feedback. It's always dangerous to assume that we know why someone does what she does. And it's usually disastrous to tell someone what she really means or is actually trying to accomplish. Most people react to an unsolicited analysis of their motivations or intent with defensiveness and resentment. Attend to the observable rather than the inferred. If you have lingering uncertainty about someone's motivation or intent, ask them for clarification. Research suggests that to be perceived as even-handed, you must give 4 positive comments for every negative comment. In other words, if you give 4 attaboys and 1 not so hot, people will perceive you as even-handed because most folks register and remember the negative much more powerfully than the positive. So remember, praise and recognition cost nothing, it builds morale and encourages confidence. Just be sure it's accurate praise. As important as it is to be generous with praise and recognition, it's also essential to be honest and direct regarding areas for improvement. Although many people suffer from feedback that's overly critical, harsh, and judgmental, it's equally common to err by trying to always be nice. Non-performers are frequently coddled and given positive performance reviews because the manager in charge doesn't want to hurt anyone's feelings or take responsibility for writing an unsatisfactory evaluation. Being too nice is actually a grave insult. The underlying message is that the person is incapable of learning, growing, and improving his performance. Moreover, if you can't find areas of improvement for your people to work on, then you shouldn't be a manager and you'll never be a leader. Leaders have the guts to tell people the truth even when it isn't comfortable. When offering constructive feedback, avoid sugarcoating or beating around the bush. Tell people when you're not satisfied with their performance and why specifically. Guide them to create a plan for change. Encourage them to do their best. A couple more points about constructive feedback. It's got to be checked and monitored. By checked, what I mean is that when you complete a feedback session, ask the person who received the session to express what she's understood. Check that her response matches your associations with your original message. Then monitor the results. The only way to measure the success of a communication is through the results you achieve with your audience. So measure your effectiveness as a giver of feedback by the changes of behavior that you observe in its wake. A few more thoughts on developing your skills as a creative coach. The first is to coach unknown disciplines. One of the great ways to grow as a coach is to challenge yourself to help others learn subjects which you haven't mastered yourself. And this is an essential skill for all managers. The higher up you go, the less you're going to know about what everybody's doing, and yet you become even more responsible for the results that they all achieve. On my longer residential leadership seminars, I often devote a couple of afternoons to recreational activities. I coach my students in a variety of activities in which I've developed some skill, such as juggling, running, swimming, aikido, and tennis. One of my clients once asked me for help with his golf game. And my initial response was, well, sorry, I don't play golf. He said, well, you're the learning expert. You're helping all these people in tennis and juggling. I want some help with my golf game. Well, he put me on the spot and was ready to hoist me on my own petard, so I rose to the occasion. I figured I'd apply the learning model that you've been learning throughout this whole program to his problem with golf. So the first thing I needed to do was to attempt to understand the problem. He told me that he had a hitch in his backswing, and despite all kinds of coaching and golf magazines and golf videos and golf clinics, the hitch continued. So I conjured up in my mind's eye images of golfers I'd seen on television like Tom Watson and Jack Nicklaus, and in my mind's eye, I pictured their perfect swing. So I had some concept of what he was probably after. Then I asked him to make a few swings. Well, it became obvious that in his backswing, he had a tendency to raise his right shoulder and stiffen his neck a little bit. Now, at this point, I probably could have just said to him, hey, you're stiffening your neck and tightening your shoulder. That's the cause of your problem. But if he was aware of this, he wouldn't be doing it in the first place. So I recognized he needed a little bit more feedback. Applying the principle of educere, trying to draw him out to discover it, I said, well, look, I want you to pay special attention to your right shoulder and to your neck muscles as you go into your backswing. See if you notice anything that's out of balance. Well, he did the backswing. The same tension was there, and he said, nope, I don't notice anything differently. So I began to realize that he needed some more immediate form of objective feedback. He hadn't been able to see this in the video coaching he'd received at a golf clinic, although it was pretty much obvious to me. So I decided to give him some kinesthetic feedback. I bent down behind him and put my right hand on his shoulder, very, very lightly. And I said, I'm going to leave my hand here on your shoulder. As you go into your backswing, I want you to pay attention and see if you notice anything different or unusual about this shoulder compared to the other one. Well, as soon as he went into his backswing, he immediately paused and said, hey, wait a minute, I'm raising my right shoulder, aren't I? And I said, yeah, you are. He said, well, I don't need to do that. I said, no, maybe not. He said, this tension must be the cause of my darn hitch. I moved away from him, and on his next shot, he hit a perfect drive straight down the fairway that actually hit the pin. And I retired from coaching golf. So, apply your powers of observation and knowledge of the learning process to facilitate learning in unfamiliar disciplines. A fringe benefit is that you will automatically begin to learn the more technical aspects of that discipline. As I did with the golfer, help facilitate overall states of relaxed concentration. Poise is often the missing link in learning situations. So guide your students towards an integration of mind and body, helping them to discover and release unnecessary tensions. Remember that most people don't know how to translate the command relax into physical reality. So instead, create an atmosphere which is conducive to relaxed concentration. As you coach unknown disciplines, you'll need to access the beginner's mind. You want to seek opportunities to learn from your students and others who are more skilled than you to keep your own learning process alive. Avoid the pitfalls of the expert syndrome. Put yourself in the unfamiliar, challenging situations where you become as a child. This will keep you free from the stifling arrogance and complacency of the know-it-all. Coach John Wooden once said, "It's what you learn after you know it all that counts." And George Leonard gracefully points out, "In the master's secret mirror, even at the moment of highest renown and accomplishment, there is an image of the newest student in class, eager for knowledge, willing to play the fool." And one last point. Ask your students to teach. When people teach what they've learned, it forces them to integrate and incorporate the learning at a deeper level. Encouraging your students to teach what they've learned accelerates their path to mastery.
Michael, I have some questions regarding applications of the many ideas you've presented. First of all, if I were looking to hire an employee, how could I evaluate the candidates without relying on objective left-brain credentials?
The key thing here is it's not an either-or approach. You must rely on objective left-brain credentials. They are necessary but not sufficient. A lot of my clients just hire on the resume, and a person's effectively presentable, got a good resume, has a good degree, pass all the left brain criteria, boom, you've got the job. I don't suggest dispensing with that. We still want to get people with the best left brain credentials, but we also want to check out their right brain credentials with the same kind of intensity that we look into their left brain credentials. For example, one of my clients, a major pension fund, reorganized their whole way of doing business. As part of that process, I helped them write a new vision statement, a mission statement, a value statement, and a strategic plan. But to tie it all together, we had to also design a new recruiting plan that was in harmony with the vision, mission, and values. Previously, they had just hired people with MBAs and PhDs from the best universities who had all the quantitative left-brain type skills that they thought were necessary for the job. But when they wrote their new vision, mission, and values, they emphasized the importance of excellent communication, of being able to listen to the client, of being able to work effectively as a team. And a lot of their older employees were folks who were very good with numbers, but not so good in dealing with clients. So as their culture changed, the left brain hiring criteria was leaving some of these people behind. But without actually changing their hiring protocols, they'd still go on hiring people for the old culture, even though they were trying to institute a new one. So I worked with them to develop a new approach to recruiting. And not just recruiting, but the whole hiring process. Previously, they had one person who would basically bring somebody in, interview them, and hire them. And we changed that. Since the idea was to build a team, we created an internal hiring panel, which would always include the manager who was doing the hiring and 2 representatives from the senior level of the organization, preferably from different branches. Then, together, we worked out a series of questions to discover how the applicant fit in with the values and new culture of the organization. We wanted to find out if these people were good presenters. So we made it part of the interview for them to give a presentation on their own personal strengths and weaknesses. We wanted people who were more creative, so we asked them for specific examples of applying creativity in their previous work history. And the way we ran these interviews was very tough. If the person couldn't give us an actual example of something they'd done that was creative, the answer was no, not creative. So in other words, we held people to high standards of right brain skill, just as we were holding them to the highest standards of left brain skill. The result for this organization is that everyone they've hired since they've instituted the new recruiting plan is working out to be a tremendous success. Because, it's amazing. If you ask for what you really want, you're much more likely to get it. If you ask for only half of what you want because you haven't really thought that you could ask for somebody who's really creative and a leader as well as a brilliant analyst, well, that's what you're going to get.
Now, once we've hired these exceptional employees, it's still important to keep them growing in the context of a learning environment. But not every organization has evolved to that point. If that's the case in my organization, what can I do as an individual to help foster a learning environment?
Learning environments are always a function of each individual's own approach to the process of learning. If everybody's waiting for somebody else to create the environment, it's never going to happen. The way you create a learning environment in your organization is by demonstrating the process of continuous learning yourself. You're committed to learning from your mistakes. You model the creative spiral, setting clear goals and seeking feedback on your current reality, holding the creative tension between the two. You apply the principles of being a creative coach to bring out the creative genius in everybody else. You really have to start looking at people around you as possessors of this extraordinary potentiality. Yes, you've got to, at the same time, understand their weaknesses, but you look for what's best in them, and you'll be amazed how it starts to come out. Now, obviously, one person in the midst of a backward organization may have trouble transforming the whole thing by themselves just by modeling this behavior. But this attitude is somewhat contagious. It tends to spread. And when individuals make the decision to take a creative approach to learning, they tend to bring it out in others. And when you bring it out in one, maybe they can bring it out in another, and it starts to build. Of course, in the best organizations, senior management's helping to create this context, and it's much easier to do. It's really sad that in many organizations, they talk the talk of creating a learning environment and a learning organization, and then they punish people for doing anything different. They reward total individual success and performance, thereby punishing team performance, and create a system that makes it really hard to get the whole environment to be positive. But even so, that may be in your circle of concern. It's not in your circle of influence. Within your own circle of influence at any given time is the freedom to learn, the freedom to bring out the learning in others, and that's where it really begins, and ultimately that's where it ends.
Well, is it possible in today's business environment to foster such a wholly integrated genius like Leonardo da Vinci?
I think we have to foster whole workforces of Leonardo da Vinci's who are capable of practicing the Da Vincian principles. Questionare, the continuous quest for knowledge and learning. Well, that's essential in a rapidly changing environment. Demonstrazione, we want people who are going to get out there and test it and know it for real, not just take the advice of some authority or academic. Sensazione, we need people who are aware, people who are alive. Sfumato, look, if people can't deal with ambiguity, they're just not going to make it in a rapidly changing environment. Arte scienza, balancing left side, right side, convergent and divergent thinking, being well-rounded, it's essential in today's workplace. Corporalita, you've got to be fit, you've got to be poised. It's not even an option anymore. You're just going to be so fatigued you'll never be able to last more than a decade. And last but not least, connezione. You've got to be able to see connections, be a systems thinker, a big picture thinker, as well as being detail-oriented. If not, you're just going to constantly be in the dark, left behind, without a clue.
It sounds like you're suggesting that we take on the role of entrepreneur within our organization. Is that a valuable approach?
It's not just valuable to think like an entrepreneur, it's essential. One of the changes that the world has gone through is that the concept of the job, of having a job, effectively doesn't exist anymore. Now, you may still have a job, but Your company could restructure tomorrow and you'll be downsized, right-sized, happy-sized, or splendid-sized. One way or another, you could be out of there. Because what you are to your company now is a set of skills. And as long as those skills are relevant to the company's needs based on what customers are demanding, you have an opportunity to exchange those skills for money. But the marketplace is changing so fast that tomorrow you might not have that opportunity. So entrepreneurs always think this way. They always think, I have to create a skill set, a service, a product, something that people want. What people want might change, so I might have to change what I'm offering. And people who hold jobs must think the same way, because those jobs are only illusions.
One of the keys to a creative approach to business that you mentioned is playfulness. How can we bring an element of play to our day-to-day work?
Well, playfulness is an attitude, and I'm always a little bit leery of, here's a serious guide to learning how to play. One great way might be just have a mirror in your office and look at yourself and look how serious and miserable you're looking, and remember to laugh at yourself. There's a lot of humor in the workplace that's sort of cynical and not really oriented towards excellence and high performance. It's sort of like life is miserable, so let's laugh at it. And sometimes we need that as a survival skill. But the kind of playful attitude that I'm talking about is much more like a baby's. It's much more a function of curiosity, wonder, openness. It's the kind of playfulness that comes from being passionately involved in something. Then the mind naturally becomes more playful because when you're curious, when you're interested, you're going to start to explore something from different angles. Now, if you're in a dead-end working situation, if you don't love what you do, well, trying to tell jokes or play games or have colors in the office isn't really going to do that much. You have to look at a more fundamental question, which is how can I reorganize my life to find a way to get paid for doing something that can awaken my passion and my true interest? Then playfulness will follow.
So passion is a key. Well, the problem is many people are more passionate about their outside activities than they are about work. What do you suggest in that situation?
Well, once again, it's a question of being aligned with what you're actually doing. And, a lot of us grew up with this survival model of having a job. I mean, I'm incredibly grateful to my parents and my grandparents. My grandparents came over from Europe. They left pogroms and all kinds of hideous situations, landed on these shores, worked 18 hours a day in sweatshop-like conditions, saved their pennies, and built businesses so that my dad could go to dental school and become an oral surgeon. Now, their orientation was always towards education, but first and foremost, their survival was threatened. So they took whatever work they could find, worked incredibly hard at it, and made their lives a success. They went on to do all sorts of interesting things when they were older, related to culture and philanthropy and so on. But the bottom line was that for them, work was purely survival. And, that was only a couple generations ago, and I can really relate to that. They created the opportunity for my dad, and my mom's parents created the opportunity for my mom to live a life of middle-class American success. And my folks were still fundamentally oriented towards survival, but they were a little bit further up the Maslowian hierarchy in terms of the scope of the world that was offered to them. Well, I was blessed with this kind of parenting and the kinds of opportunities that my parents' success created for me in terms of education. I've been able to look at the world from the perspective not just of survival, which I'm still personally very concerned about, but also how to fulfill the fullness of my own gifts, my own talents, my own self-expression. And it's been my passion to help other people figure out how to do the same thing. The thing is, a lot of folks, for very good reason, are still stuck in a survival orientation. They think of job as purely something to pay the rent. And first and foremost, it is. But if you only think of it that way, you're almost doomed to stay that way. Even if you're in a survival situation now, you can move back from it for a moment and think, okay, how can I rise out of this? How can I find a way to get paid for doing something that I actually like, maybe even love? Because the curious thing here is when you find something that you like or ideally love, you're probably going to be better at it. You're probably going to have more to offer than something that you don't love. But the problem is people just don't bother to think this way. When you're stuck in that survival orientation, it just doesn't seem possible that you could be rewarded and paid for doing what you love. There's this mindset that says life's going to be miserable, you're going to suffer and work hard, and that's the way it goes. So what I'm suggesting is find your deepest passion, keep thinking about a way to express it, and then get paid for it.
One of the most highly valued and well-paid positions is that of a leader. But as you discussed, leadership ability doesn't always come along with a title. Are there some people who are naturally better suited to be managers than leaders?
Sure. Although we all have the potential to develop our whole brain, there's no question that some people are more oriented towards analytical, detail-oriented management-type skills, and other people have a greater gift of interpersonal intelligence, of leadership, of inspiration, of public speaking, of creating and crafting and communicating a vision. No doubt about it. So the idea is to know, first of all, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, and to set about working on your weaknesses so you become more balanced. In the meantime, if you're primarily a manager type, you want to surround yourself with some leaders. If you're more of the leader type, you better have some more manager types around. The idea then is to create a balanced brain team, but not with the assumption, okay, now I have my team in place, so everything's fine, maintain the status quo of my own self. Now that I have the team in place, I can learn from each person's strengths so that every day, in every way, I become more balanced.
You said that love is the ultimate brain nourishment. How can we increase our capacity to love our teammates or employees, even if we don't particularly like them?
That's a great question. And, I'm not here to preach some kind of like airy-fairy, love everybody, isn't it nice? Or to pretend that everybody's really lovable, because I work in the real world. And there are definitely some folks who are not very likable, to say the least. But the secret is to separate people's personality from their soul. I don't love a lot of personalities. As a matter of fact, there's many personalities I don't like. But I've tried to train myself to see past the personality to the soul of every individual. Now, when you're really seeing a person's soul, love is the natural response. Because on the level of the soul, we're all the same. We're all connected. On the level of the personality, we're really separate and really different, and people's personality on a day-to-day basis can be a real pain. But if you can just remember to check in on that deeper level, you'll find it gives you more perspective, more patience, more tolerance, and you might then be able to come up with some better strategies for dealing with some difficult personalities.
Let's talk for a minute about boosting our individual capacity. Will our ability to recall information naturally improve as we expand our creative abilities?
Well, actually, it's generally the other way around. Your ability to be creative will expand as you improve your ability to recall, because the more you know, the more you can link new ideas. The more ideas you have stored, the greater the possibility for creating new connections that you haven't seen before. Having said that, it's a positive cycle, because as you expand your creative ability, you're likely to become more passionate and enthusiastic. And the more enthusiastic you are about learning or creating something, the better your memory works. I mean, think about it. What do you really remember? Well, you remember the things that you are most passionate about. People might say, well, I forgot the meeting, and they usually forget it because they didn't really care about it that much. But You don't forget the date with the person that you say, oh my God, I really fancy this person. I can't wait to meet them. You don't forget that date because you're passionate about it. And you don't forget ideas, things that you read, things that you learn that you're passionate about. Well, the more creative you become, the more things you become passionate about, the better your memory. The better your memory, the more freedom you have to create new associations and become more creative. So recall, memory, and creativity work together in a virtuous cycle.
You also discussed the downward cycle that can result when we dwell on our mistakes. Well, obviously, we all want to avoid that, but is there a clear distinction between having a positive attitude toward mistakes and fooling yourself?
No question. So-called positive thinking can be one of the greatest forms of self-delusion. A lot of what passes for positive thinking is people lying to themselves. They've made a mistake, they've had a huge disaster with a third divorce, the fifth time they've been fired for the same reason, and then they go get some positive thinking book and they say, well, this is great, I feel wonderful, all these great opportunities are open to me, and they wind up getting this kind of phony, sickening smile and frozen mask of a face. So we're not talking about self-delusion here. I've emphasized throughout the program the importance of accurate feedback on your current reality. A little warning sign that you're not doing a good job of learning from your mistakes is when you make the same ones over and over again.
Most of us consider tension to be a negative thing, and you've painted a different picture in this program. You've demonstrated that creative tension can be a real driving force toward accomplishment. But is it healthy to always have a level of creative tension?
Well, even creative geniuses need to take a break every now and then and just lie on the beach. But generally speaking, most folks could afford to raise their level of creative tension significantly. The idea of tension being bad is an unfortunate one. Tension by itself is neither good or bad. The question is, do we have the right amount of tension in the right place at the right time? So to have a powerful vision, a vivid idea of something you want to accomplish, and then a clear awareness of where you are now can be somewhat painful, especially if where you are now is way, way, way far away from where you want to be. This is what stops a lot of people who are in dire straits from creating ambitious goals. People who are stuck in a survival mode don't think about getting paid for something they love because their life seems so miserable, that seems unrealistic, and it's too depressing to even think about it. So what they need to do is not try to hold that massive creative tension between the ultimate idealistic goal and where I am now. What they need to do is to create a smaller goal. You know the old saying that a journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. So they've got to think, how can I work in my circle of influence and take one step today that changes things a little bit? So that's probably the appropriate amount of creative tension. What's my goal for the day? What's my reality? Then at the end of the day, if I've achieved my goal, I can set a new one for the next day. And each day, step by step, I create goals. And then I build my ability to take on bigger chunks of creative tension. A perfect metaphor for it is relaxed concentration, because we think of these things as opposites. Relaxation is just, kind of lying flat out on the couch, and concentration's being really focused, giving all your attention to something. But the ideal state is a balance between the two. You're relaxed, but you're focused at the same time. In the ideally balanced human body, there's tension in every part of the body, but it's flowing tension. It's not rigid tension. A body without tension would be flaccid. Too much tension and it's rigid. But flowing, lively quality of natural tension in the right place at the right time is the most empowering state to be in.
A lot of what you're describing here sounds like meditation. Is there any connection between meditating and entering the creative process?
Fundamentally, it's the same thing. J. Krishnamurti said, meditation is not a means to an end, it's both the means and the end. The creative process ultimately is something that comes through us. We can't control grace, we can't manipulate grace, but we can open ourselves to grace. The most graceful people express their creativity, and that creativity is born of the same source that meditation springs from. One of my favorite sayings is, humility is the soul of confidence. I'll tell you where I came up with that saying. It was just from noticing that in the most creative moments of my life, I had this feeling of a lack of ego. Now, ask anybody who knows me, I'm a pretty strong egoed person. But in my moments of greatest fulfillment and greatest creative self-expression, I find that my ego disappears because I'm just aware that there's this force that is stronger than my little self, and that I've been lucky enough to link up with it, that it's blessed me, and then all sorts of good things happen. And then, of course, my ego tends to reassert itself, and I get in my own way and shut it down. To me, meditation is a similar process. It's just aiming to stop the noise in my own mind so that I can experience this fundamentally graceful state.
If we're able to quiet our mind like you're describing, will we be able to answer the lifelong question of whether or not we're acting from the promptings of our true self?
Well, that's the tricky bit. We can't always know for sure. And the secret here is just to keep on asking the question, to create enough quietness inside yourself that you might be able to discern a true inner voice. I'll tell you something else here. It's a paradox, is that one way to know if you're acting from the promptings of your true self is to get accurate feedback from people that you know, who you know see you deeply, love, care about, and support you. Right? People who are looking at you not from an invasive, kind of manipulative way of loving and holding and grasping, but who you know on a soul level appreciate who you are. Check in with these people, get their feedback. That's another way to kind of keep this compass going. But ultimately, it's you and yourself and creating enough quietness to be able to let the messages filter through.
So where do we draw the line between being true to ourselves and deferring to a higher authority?
Well, if we say higher authority, if you mean by that your boss, then when it comes down to it, you've got to be true to yourself, no question about it. Now, sometimes being true to yourself means balancing competing factors. You know, on small things, it's a great idea to yield. Save holding out for the really big things. So I'm not suggesting being some kind of maniac who always does, well, this is right for me, so move out of my way. Those people are impossible to live with. So on the day-to-day things, be flexible. It's no big deal. On the really important things, your values, your priority, then there's no question you follow your own self. If by higher authority we mean the divine, well, then there's no separation, because that is your true self.
Now, you're a student of the martial arts. What lessons have you learned through that practice that can help us put our creative genius to work in all areas of our life?
The art that I find to be the most powerful metaphor for business and everyday life is the martial art of Aikido. Aikido was developed by Morihei Ueshiba, and Ueshiba was the top martial artist in Japan, but he was fundamentally dissatisfied with the win-lose paradigm of traditional martial arts, even though he usually won. As a matter of fact, he was undefeated. He was a very spiritually oriented person, and he intuited the connectedness of all things, just like Leonardo da Vinci did, just like many great geniuses do. And he kept thinking about how this connectedness applied to martial arts, which was about combat and conflict. Well, one day, a sword master came from across Japan to challenge him. And in those days, you just didn't say no to a challenge. It wasn't done. So he reluctantly accepted the challenge. For 45 minutes, the sword master attacked Morihei Ueshiba But every time Ueshiba, who we now call O-sensei, means great teacher, O-sensei moved out of the way just at the last nanosecond, and the sword master missed and was thrown off balance because he expected to actually hit O-sensei. This went on for 3/4 of an hour until the sword master collapsed from exhaustion, and his seconds had to drag him away. Well, O-sensei went off to his garden, and he had a classical enlightenment experience. Now, if you study enlightenment experiences, you know that they have two significant elements. One is light, and the other is a sense of connectedness. And this is just the experience that O-sensei had. He was surrounded by light. I mean, you read the works of the Christian mystics, the Jewish mystics, Sufi mystics, Buddhism, Hinduism. Light is always there. Well, he was surrounded by light. The other thing the great mystics always report is this sense of oneness with the universe, and that's also what O-sensei experienced. He had a compelling, visceral, profound, immediate experience of connectedness with the entire universe. He actually wrote at the time, "I was surrounded by light. My body was transformed into a golden one. I could understand the message behind the singing of the birds. I felt one with the whole universe. I realized in that moment that the essence of martial arts is the spirit of protection for all living things. The essence of the martial arts is love." Well, what a powerful, transformative realization. I mean, martial arts as love, that just seems almost like an exact opposite. It takes a Sinvergent thinker to understand it. It sounds like a pretty powerful philosophy. I mean, we're all connected, so protect your attacker. Anybody who attacks has lost harmony with the universe, harmony with themselves, and it becomes the goal of the Aikidoist to return or restore that person to harmony. You know, there was a study done at Rahway State Prison in New Jersey where they asked a group of muggers to rate the muggability of people who they had videotaped walking down the street. And the muggers reported, of course, that the most muggable people were people who were obviously infirm, people who had some kind of physical impediment, the proverbial little old lady with a cane and so on. Also, pretty muggable were people who walked in a way that seemed like they were out of it or unaware, or people who walked with a kind of aggressive gait. The least muggable people were the people who just walked in a balanced state of relaxed concentration with a sense of easy purpose. So the lessons of Aikido are many, but one of them is to cultivate this state of balance, of poise, of connectedness, so that you don't get mugged by your boss, by your audience when you give a presentation, by your spouse, or by your kids. One last thought about Aikido, because I use the metaphor a lot, and it's something that I practice myself passionately. It's this idea of becoming a black belt. There's a myth in the West that black belt means expert. But I'd just like to finish by telling you what black belt really means. The word in Japanese for black belt is shodan. And shodan means first step. It means now you've learned enough to really begin learning. I hope at this point in this program that you've learned enough to begin learning and applying the principles of putting your creative genius to work. God bless.